Hello and welcome to our special coverage of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I'm Ladi Akiridulwale. The headlines. Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi calls for all efforts to resolve Ukraine crisis at UN Security Council meeting. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskiy says war has entered every Russian home as a result of mobilization campaign. And Russia's defense ministry clarifies details of mobilization, insists reservists with combat experience and relevant military special ties will be drafted first. Let's get right into it. All efforts conducive to resolving the Ukraine crisis should be supported, and the legitimate security concerns of all countries should be taken seriously. And that's according to Chinese State Councillor and Foreign Minister Wang Yi. He was speaking at a high-level meeting of the UN Security Council on the crisis. The meeting was held on the margins of the annual debate in the UN General Assembly and brought together foreign ministers from countries serving on the 15-member council. Mr. Wang expressed concerns over the current situation and called on the relevant parties to stick to dialogue.
China's position on Ukraine is consistent and clear. President Xi Jinping pointed out that the sovereignty and the territorial integrity of all countries should be respected. The purpose and principles of the UN Charter should be observed, and legitimate security concerns of all countries should be taken seriously. All efforts to resolve the crisis should be supported.
When it comes to the safety and security of nuclear facilities.
And Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskiy, in his usual nightly address, says Russia's new mobilization campaign was, quote, a sign of its army's collapse as the war has entered every Russian home. This comes after President Vladimir Putin launched the new mobilization for the 7-month-old war that has already killed thousands and displaced billions, as well as damaged the global economy.
Russia's decision on mobilization is a frank admission that the professional army, which has been prepared for decades to take someone else's land, did not manage to stand it and collapsed. And now, due to the mobilization, for most Russian citizens, Russia's war against Ukraine is not something on TV or the internet, but something that has entered every Russian home.
And at the United Nations, the world leaders who have gathered there have called for Moscow to be held accountable for human rights violations in Ukraine, even as Foreign Minister of Russia, Sergei Lavrov, defended Moscow's war and accused its neighbor of committing atrocities. The Security Council meeting took place during the annual gathering of world leaders at the General Assembly.
Of members of the Security Council, we must unequivocally reject Russia's attempts to annex Ukrainian territory. We must make clear to President Putin that his attack on the Ukrainian people must stop, that there can be no impunity for those perpetrating atrocities, and that he must withdraw from Ukraine and restore regional and global stability. If he chose to, he could stop this war, a war which has done untold damage to the Ukrainian and the Russian peoples. His war is an assault on Ukraine, an assault on the UN Charter, and an assault on the international norms that protect us all. So, we stand with our Ukrainian friends for as long as it takes.
The amount of lies coming from the Russian diplomats is quite extraordinary. Today, we are mostly focusing on crimes committed by Russian soldiers in Ukraine. But if anyone thinks they are the only one ready to kill, torture, rape, cut off genitals, they are wrong. Russian diplomats are directly complicit because their lies incite these crimes and cover them up. Apparently, the only thing in today's address by Russia in this torrent of lies worthy of reaction is the inappropriate slang used when mentioning a president of a foreign country, the president of Ukraine. I also noted today that Russian diplomats flee almost as aptly as Russian soldiers. Yesterday, Putin announced mobilization. But what he really announced before the whole world was his defeat. You can draft 300, 500,000 people, but you will never win this war. Today, every Ukrainian is a weapon ready to defend Ukraine and the principles enshrined in the UN Charter. Russia will fail and will bear full responsibility for the crime of aggression and consequent war crimes, crimes against humanity and genocide.
Russia has, in the meantime, announced that its troops attacked Ukrainian military targets in Kharkiv and Zaporizhia, and Ukraine said its military forces continued to hit Russian logistics facilities. Defense Ministry spokesperson Igor Konashenkov said at a briefing that the Russian Air Force used high-precision weapons to strike targets such as temporary deployment points of Ukrainian troops and foreign mercenaries near the city of Zaporizhia. Russian forces also attacked the Ukrainian 14th and 93rd Mechanized Brigades in Kharkiv, as well as the Ukrainian 46th Air Mobile Brigade in Kherson. Russian forces also struck Ukrainian artillery units, personnel, and weapons in several areas. But according to a Ukrainian official, Russian forces fired missiles at the city of Zaporizhia, hitting key facilities there. Ukraine's Southern Command, on the other hand, has said that Ukrainian forces continued their blockade operation over the past 24 hours, striking Russian military equipment, logistics, transport, and command structures, among other targets. And Dmitry Medvedev, the former Russian president, says that any weapons in Moscow's arsenal, including strategic nuclear weapons, could be used to defend territories incorporated into Russia from Ukraine. Mr. Medvedev, the deputy chairman of Russia's Security Council, also says that referenda being organized by Russian-installed and separatist authorities in large swathes of occupied Ukrainian territory will take place, and that, quote, there is no going back. His comments come after President Vladimir Putin warned that Moscow would use, quote, all available means to protect Russia's territorial integrity as he moved to mobilize more than 300,000 reserve forces to fight in Ukraine. The thinly veiled nuclear threat drew immediate condemnation from an array of Western leaders. Mr. Medvedev adds that the protection of all the territories would be significantly strengthened by the Russian armed forces. It's no news that Russian President Vladimir Putin has announced a partial mobilization amidst this prolonged conflict, but Russia's defense ministry has come out to clarify details of the mobilization. It says induction officers in Russia will focus on reservists with combat experience and relevant military specialties during the ongoing mobilization. There is no specific drafting order, the ministry admitted, but said priority would be given to reservists who have previously undergone training as tank operators, artillery crew members, drivers, mechanics, and motorized infantry. It also called combat experience one of the key factors in its choice of draftees. According to the ministry, the Russian military plans to call both the rank-and-file soldiers and officers to arms, adding that reservists aged up to 35 can be drafted as rank-and-file soldiers, while the age threshold will be between 50 and 55 years for officers, depending on the rank. Let's talk to Professor Denis Soltis of the Department of Public Administration and International Studies at the Kimip University in Almaty, Kazakhstan. He joins us virtually. Good morning to you. Thank you for your time this morning.
Good morning. It's good to see you. Do you hear me, incidentally?
Absolutely clearly as well. I'm doing very well. Let's look at this developments, shall we? First, this mobilization issue. Depending on who you ask, there are different interpretations of what this means, both for Russia and for Ukraine. Those who are calling for escalation or who are calling this escalation are there. Those who are saying that, well, it's a way of admitting some form of defeat or desperation are there. But then those who are in the middle, like Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan and others who are not directly combatants, must be viewing this with some kind of alarm. Is that true?
Well, the mobilization signifies two things. One is still a reaffirmation of the Kremlin's determination to pursue the war and aggression as far as they can. It's there is no desire to end the war. That's a false hope. I suspect that. Well, yes, and the Russian army has severe personnel shortage problems. So there's an objective reason for why they should call this mobilization. But I also suspect that Putin is feeling a threat from the extreme right wing, shall we say. If there is, the extent of opposition within the elite, within the army, within the Russian society is up for speculation. But if there was any general direction from which some kind of a move against Putin would occur, it would probably be from the extremists or the war party, the far right, shall we say. Who accused Putin of not being tough enough, not being cruel enough. He should use nuclear weapons. He should have mobilized the entire country a long time ago. This is what these extremists are saying. So I think that could be understood. Putin's move is kind of a way to play to or forestall opposition from that direction. As for the effectiveness of the mobilization itself, this is a separate discussion, but Ukrainian military experts are not particularly worried, I would say, because there will be enormous logistical and organizational problems in this. The Russian army already has not been able to replace its losses. And you probably know that they've already been, they're desperate. They're already promising amnesties to prison convicts who will serve debtors. They will catch people at banks with debts and close their accounts until they agree to serve in the army. Social marginals of all kinds. So even now, they have not been able to recruit people. So it's a very moot point as to whether they will be able to get another 300,000. Also, even if they were to train these, if they were to train these, call them up and locate them and train them thoroughly, this would be a matter of months, well into the winter or the next year. And by that time, the front might look very different. If things go well on the battlefield for the Ukrainians, this mobilization, these mobilized troops would arrive too late and would reinforce defeat instead of success.
But
so,
there is something, Prof. 24 hours ago, as part of the mobilization, when Mr. Putin was announcing it, he made a reference to it. And just now, the vice chairman, former president and former prime minister, Dmitry Medvedev, has also made reference to it. In fact, his reference is more explicit. And indeed, that is a very credible threat because Russia, by some estimates, has anything from 3,000 to 4,000 operable nuclear warheads trained mostly on Europe and European cities. Now, are you seeing a situation where if, as you say, they are increasingly desperate, they might resort to that as a measure to put all of this on the table and get everybody into this?
Well, I'm not qualified to speak about nuclear deterrence. That's a science in itself. What I understand of this is that nuclear strikes would be, or plans for a nuclear strike would be visible, several days or maybe longer ahead of time. That is, these intercontinental missiles can be fired by surprise, but the intermediate ones have to be pulled out of somewhere. They have to be deployed, and the Western intelligence has not seen this. Also, well, Britain, and the United States now have hinted at retaliatory measures, not necessarily nuclear, but very serious. So that's an open question. The other thing is, even in military terms, assuming the very worst, it's not sure what a tactical weapon could do in Ukraine because the Ukrainian armed forces are highly dispersed anyway. So a tactical nuclear weapon wouldn't, hit many soldiers or wouldn't cripple the army in one place. So we hope, that is, we, you and I, or hope that this is a bluff, and we hope that the West could deter this.
There is, of course, there was the meeting that took place in one of your neighbors there, because you're of course in Kazakhstan, but there was a meeting that took place towards the end of last week in Uzbekistan, to be precise, in Samarkand, and a lot was made of the Chinese position and the other countries that were part of what is called the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and amongst those organizations are the countries that we call the stans, one of which is Kazakhstan, and then you've got Uzbekistan and a couple of others, Kyrgyzstan and so on. The question, of course, is if any of this isn't actually a bluff, if it is real, these countries are likely to be the first to feel it. I'm talking about the stans because they are very close to the theater of conflict. And if we're talking nuclear weapons or nuclear deterrence and so on, if we're getting to that stage, these countries must be worried, aren't they?
Well, yes, they've become much more cautious, shall we say, vis-a-vis Russia. Kazakhstan does not recognize the Russian annexations or territorial gains in Ukraine. They've quite, definitely moved away from neutrality, shall we say. So the mood in Kazakhstan and other countries here is definitely turning against Russia. The Shanghai Conference, they're very significant. Even the Chinese and the Indians now weighed in on this quite explicitly. So this is, I think, very, quite dramatic. It shows that Russia is now very isolated politically. So where this ultimately, so their situation is, as you said, becoming increasingly desperate. It is that. So we wonder where this will lead to. Russia, or the government, the Moscow government, is making the military setbacks in Ukraine are causing them to make more and more political and diplomatic mistakes. One was to cut off gas to Europe. The other was the nuclear threats, both with weapons or to blow up these nuclear stations in Ukraine. These are things that Europe cannot ignore. It gets them out of their complacency and out of their comfort zone. So again, the political pressure and isolation of Russia is increasing quite dramatically now. These Western countries, the Ramstein countries, now are committed, more forcefully committed now to the liberation by the Ukrainian army of the February 23rd borders, or even the 1991 borders. The United States and Britain are taking the position of the 1991 borders. And actually, in fact, this is quite striking. This is the position that Olaf Scholz, the German chancellor, took, and I believe also even Macron in France. They told Moscow or Putin, get out of Ukraine. And only once you're out of Ukraine can peace negotiations start. And this has been the long-standing now position of the Ukrainian government. No negotiations over anything until all the Russian troops are gone from all territories. So this is, quite striking.
But then that doesn't
reality
appear.
The politics will follow the
I'm sorry, Prof. It doesn't seem as if they've stuck to that really. That there'll be no negotiations until Russia leaves Ukraine, because just yesterday there was that prisoner swap involving more than 300 prisoners, many of whom were in fact Britons and Croats and Moroccans and so on in exchange for some Russians. I just thought I'd bring that in as you were trying to unfold the analysis.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's a bit of a puzzle, but here that swap is also tied to the earlier agreement on opening the Black Sea for grain imports. There was a clause there in that agreement that Russia would be allowed to export fertilizer, ammonia fertilizers, because the Russian economy is in economic problems. So they need that. So the Ukrainians were in a position to block that geographically. So that gave them some leverage. That is the Russia's desire to export fertilizer and some other products. And I think there was sanctions on a few items also were reduced or eliminated. So it's not. Yeah, it's kind of ambiguous. I take your point that there may be some feelers here being sent back and forth. But also there's the pragmatic side, I've just said, the economic side. And also Ukraine had to offer quite a bit in order to get some of its prisoners back. In the latest offensive, they captured, it seems, quite a few high-ranking Russian officers. And they've also thrown into the deal the godfather of Putin's daughters, Viktor Medvedchuk, who was an oligarch who was arrested. So I think he was part of that deal too. So, the Ukrainians have to offer quite a bit, and they do this because they value their soldiers quite highly. But yeah, what the broader symbolism of this is, it's an intriguing question. Yes.
Are you surprised, of course, by the introduction? I mean, we've seen Turkey all along. Turkey has played a leading role in some of these deals, but then there was a new player at this point, and that's Saudi Arabia. The Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia was right in the middle of this particular prisoner swap. And some are wondering how he fits in and how Saudi Arabia fits into this broad picture, because before now, they weren't quite visible.
I'm not very familiar with this, but Saudi Arabia generally has been a partner of or allied with Ukraine. They earlier contracted for Ukrainian weapons. They in fact paid for the development of a Ukrainian rocket system earlier. And Saudi Arabia, Middle Eastern country, I think it is also damaged by these blockages of food exports. So I would think that would be Saudi Arabia's motivation here.
Indeed. Thank you so very much, Professor Dennis Soltis, the Department of Public Administration at the Kimop University in Almaty, Kazakhstan. Stay safe.
You too. Be well.
Thank you. Still to come on the program, separatist held Donetsk prepares for referendum on joining Russia. Please stay on with us. Thanks for staying tuned. Welcome back to the program. The release by Russia of 5 British prisoners of war as part of an exchange with Ukraine was a surprise, and that's according to non-profit organization Presidium Network. It does relief work in Ukraine, including help with evacuations. It says the release of the 5 prisoners had happened faster than they had expected.
To be honest, we weren't expecting this to happen so fast, because of such as the families. We've been kept in the dark on a lot of these political negotiations for obvious reasons. So it became a surprise because we were still preparing for the next trial in October for majority of these people, especially the 5 that was released. They're supposed to be back in court in October, and we were expecting that to be the next phase and to navigate that phase. So we were prepared and preparing for that. Well, what we know from their journey is that they all travelled through Saudi Arabia last night and arrived back in the UK early hours this morning. We know that they have been reunited with their families now and are starting that reintegration process with their families and making sure that they know that they're safe and that they're loved, and and very happy times now. So basically, in the short term, it will just be figuring out how to get back into daily life, and them being civilians and not part of the UK military or anything. That it will be a big shock compared to what they've been living through recently. But basically, that they will have the ability to talk to specialists and to get that support that they may need, but also being able to, get a standing back in the UK, figuring out what they're going to do job-wise, and really how they can bring back a normal life if that's what they want. They will be feeling a huge amount of relief. The people that we have spoken to in the past have this element of relief, but also element of shock. These things can happen very quickly and a whole new life very, very quickly, which can be overwhelming, and that's why we give them all privacy. The images that we've seen that they seem to be in good health, and they were very happy when they arrived in Saudi Arabia, and the images we've seen them arriving back in the UK, they were happy and to see their families. So there'll be enjoyment, there'll be a lot of happy people, but also there's always that concern of their treatment and how that will impact them in the short term and medium term and long term. Basically, the only thing is that they're very happy to have him home, and this huge relief and pressure off their shoulders. And they're just very happy to see him well and alive. So that's all they said, but also asked everyone to respect their privacy and don't all contact them, and allow Dylan to have his space and make sure Dylan can make the choices now freely himself. It's a massive relief that this is it's the start of the process, and we really hope this is the start of the process of peace as well within the region, and create some security in that region again.
And from that very extensive interview, you've been hearing that 5 of the prisoners of war have returned to the United Kingdom. The 5 Britons, Aidan Iceland, Sean Pinner, Dylan Haley, John Hardin, and Andrew Hill, were reunited with their families after landing at London's Heathrow Airport. Iceland and Pinner were captured by Russian-backed forces in Ukraine's coastal city of Mariupol in April and were sentenced to death by a court in Donetsk People's Republic, one of Russia's proxies in eastern Ukraine. They, along with Moroccan Ibrahim Sadoun, were found guilty of mercenary activities and committing actions aimed at seizing power and overthrowing the constitutional order of the DPR, a sentence which had been condemned by Ukraine and Britain. Mr. Healy, a Briton providing humanitarian assistance in Ukraine, was detained in April alongside Paul Ure, who later died in detention. Mr. Hardin and Hill had been fighting alongside Ukrainian forces, and all 3 had denied being mercenaries in the Russian proxy court. At an event on the sidelines of the United Nations annual debate, human rights lawyer Amal Clooney urged countries not to become numb to war crimes. Ms. Clooney urged countries to support a Ukraine push at UN General Assembly to establish a compensation commission.
We are now more than 6 months into a war in which innocent men and women are fighting against a brutal war machine. More than 5,000 civilians are dead, including hundreds of children. As cities emerge from occupation, we find reports of mass graves from Bucha to Mariupol and now Izium. We see the bodies of men with their hands tied behind their backs, and a few days ago, reports of torture chambers in reclaimed portions of Kharkiv. UN Under-Secretary Pamela Patten, who you will hear from in a moment, has received shocking reports of sexual violence, including rape and gang rape, in which family members were forced to watch. When I addressed the UN Security Council in April, I expressed concern that we would become numb to reports of these crimes, less resolute in our intent to prosecute them, and we cannot allow that to happen. The people in this room are the leaders of 50 nations. You can do something about this. So I want us to use this meeting today to reassure the Ukrainian people that justice has not been forgotten, that accountability remains a priority, and that you are willing to play your part. I want to suggest 5 things that you can commit to today as states in order to advance accountability. First, you can help Ukrainians rebuild their country and their lives by supporting the draft UN General Assembly resolution that has been put forward by Ukraine to establish the framework for a compensation commission.
The Russian-installed voting commission chief of Donetsk People's Republic, Vladimir Vysotsky, has inspected Donetsk polling stations ahead of a referendum on joining Russia. Luhansk, Donetsk, Kherson, and Zaporizhzhia provinces are set to hold referenda between the 23rd and 27th of September. Mr. Vysotsky showed reporters ballot boxes made of clear plastic, promising the voting process would be just as transparent. The stations Mr. Vysotsky visited were, according to his estimation, 100% ready for polling. Polling station staff were seen being trained for a last-minute referendum announced only on September the 20th. Russia did not recognize the independence of the Donetsk People's Republic before February 21, 2022. However, Ukraine said it would not recognize the results of the new vote. Let's talk to Mr. Oladeyinde Ario, security analyst, who joins me here in the Lagos studios. Good morning.
Good morning, my brother.
I could see you nodding when Amal Clooney was talking about compensation commissions and the issue of not taking the eye off the ball and becoming numb to crimes, to war crimes. Do you think there's a real possibility that people could become numb to that, especially people in the immediate theater of the conflict?
Yes, it's possible, because when you are used to seeing disasters, carnage, death around you, it no longer touch you. It will affect how sensitive you are. It's possible, but I don't think the world now, the external world now, away from the center of action, will forget about it. We won't, I mean, I'm not affected anyway, and I'm sure you are not affected. So also other world leaders who are especially not happy with the turn of events. I listened to Berlusconi, former Italian premier, yesterday when he said Putin was pushed by his party, the people, his ministers, to organize the special operation. I mean, calling a war by another name, okay? And that the intention was to remove Zelenskiy and replace his government with that of reasonable people. Now, and I was asking, since when has it become the business of another country to determine who rules another independent sovereign nation? You know, when you bring that into focus, and you see the US now considering speedily to sell some powerful equipments to Russia, I mean to Ukraine, which they said they didn't give to them before because they were afraid that if it should get to enemy hands, it would be very dangerous. We may still have a long way to go in this regard. So to even start thinking of the compensation or no compensation, for me, it's too soon, it's too early.
Yeah, because
we should be looking at Putin. Yeah, attacks are still going on here and there. I mean, nobody is, like I said earlier before we came on air, if this assembly should end without some concrete decisions being taken and steps being initiated to put the war to an end, being in the UN will be questionable in future, which some countries will be asking, why are we here?
Yeah, what's the benefit?
Yeah, because if it happened to Ukraine, it could happen to any other country.
But then, as you say that, there are many people who will be nodding that you're right, except for the fact that it doesn't appear that there is either the willpower or the alignment of interests, shall we say,
of forces,
or of the forces to bring about this kind of situation. Because even though it seems things are intractable, somewhere in between, when food supply was threatened, there was willpower to negotiate
See,
that.
the grains movement.
Only yesterday, there was a prisoner swap, which you and I were discussing before we came on
215 on each side.
So it is not as if they are not talking or that there's no opportunity for talking. They are all in New York, mostly, except Mr. Zelensky. All the others are in New York.
Right.
Mr. Macron, you were referring to, Mr. Schultz, that you were referring to. They're all in New York at the moment, talking at the UN. So, is it that because those alignment of forces that you just said has not happened, we are going to be subject to this continuing conflict until then?
In another 24 hours, or is it even today? Today is 24, right?
Today is 23rd.
23rd, right? By tomorrow, it will be 7 months that this attack started. And what we're seeing now are colleges of interest amalgamating, okay? Each trying to protect his own interest, whereby at the end of the day, maybe they can say we won. But this should not be about the victor or the vanquished. It should be about finding lasting peace. Now, I understand Poland has started distributing iodine tablets to people living in certain areas, especially where they have the largest nuclear plant.
That's Zaporizhia.
Because to manage their health in case of exposure to radiation. I mean, when you look at that, you still want to ask, why is Poland taking that step? Why are they not reaching out to those interests that they think can prevail on Russia? You know, when I mean Russia, I mean Putin and his people now, okay? Then we've also seen the introduction of a new strategy. When I heard Zelenskiy announcing that Russians should no longer, join the call-up because they've lost, she said, 50,000 Russian army. How, Mr. Soldiers, how would we have been able to know that? Okay? And the next consequence of that is that virtually flights to every nation that gives Russians visa-free entries have been fully booked, and the tickets have gone up. Why? They want to get out of Russia. And there was a protest, and I understand about 1,500 people now have been arrested, you know. And I read the report on the prisoners swap. The ones that came from the Russian end, they were less than normal in physical condition, because according to them, they were tortured, which of course Russia has denied. So all of this gathered together still shows that until those interests can find a central meeting point and then begin to talk on the issue of putting an end to the war, then there's still a problem.
I know that you are particularly concerned about the humanitarian side of it, which doesn't get as much airtime or as much prominence even in the discussions. And occasionally do you hear people talk about the women, the children,
yes. And then the aged too.
The aged and so on, those
even
with
the
physical
sick
challenges, those who and so that while all the debate, the discussion, the exchange of weapons and all of that keeps going on, military aid here and there, what is happening at that level continues to be almost ignored.
Not almost ignored, completely ignored. There have been series of attacks in different cities, and people were murdered. Even those territories occupied, Ukraine territories occupied, the four by Russia, where they are purportedly preparing for memoranda, aimed at having an election on November 4th to declare them Russian territories. Nobody mentioned those who were wounded, those who were injured, those who are denied access to healthcare, and even food for that matter. Now, all the grain negotiations that they did were all about sending grain outside of Ukraine to Asia and Africa, not about managing the locals who have become despondent and homeless. Okay, within Ukraine, a lot of them have become prisoners of war with nowhere to go, no means of livelihood, and they're just roaming around, eking livings like miscreants. The reports, global reports, have left that, and that gives me concern because I'm a human being like any of them. You and I could have been in that situation. So
yes,
where do we go from there?
If we're Ukrainians.
Yes, if we're Ukrainians, we could have been in that situation. So you can imagine that they are leaving humanity out of their conversations, which makes me a lot sad. until that drops on them that, look, like I said the last time I was here, when you bomb a building, the likelihood of human beings being there is very high. So you are equally killing people. When you throw sorties or warhead or whatever, now they're going to be using drones, even more extensively, armed drones, and that will create more damage. And I still wonder why nobody is thinking or talking about those human beings. They are not dots. They are not figures. They have blood in them like other people. So why are we not showing concern about their welfare?
Indeed. One can only continue to draw attention to this as we go on.
Well, I hope other countries are learning from this. When you drum the beats of war. I mean, Berlusconi didn't shock me. When he said they thought Putin, the Russians don't have business going around Ukraine. They just go to Kiev, get hold of Zelenskiy, as if you are going to pick a headmaster in a primary school and then replace him. That's the mindset of those who are behind Russia. And the earlier they change their stance, the better for humanity.
Mr. Lade Diario, as always, thank you for your time this morning. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
Still to come on the program, former UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson confuses Mr. Zelensky with Mr. Putin in his speech at the House of Commons. Please stay on with us. Welcome back. Former British Prime Minister Boris Johnson wrongly referred to Volodymyr Zelensky as Vladimir Putin as he spoke in the House of Commons. Thanks also, of course, to the inspirational leadership of Vladimir Putin, the inspirational leadership of Volodymyr Zelensky, he told fellow members of Parliament. He apologized as soon as he realized his mistake.
Heroism of the Ukrainian armed forces, thanks in part to the weapons that we are proud to be offering. I congratulate my right honourable friend on his description of the work of the UK armed forces, the weapons that we are sending, and the huge list. Thanks also, of course, to the inspirational leadership of Vladimir Putin, the inspirational leadership of Volodymyr Zelensky. Forgive me.
All right, let's talk to Ini John McQuarrie as we wrap up the program this morning. Ini, morning.
Good morning.
We've been focusing on the effect of the war in Ukraine on Europe, on America, sometimes on Nigeria. But there are other countries that are equally affected.
Obviously,
This morning, Southeast Asia.
Yes, and so we have the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. That's 10 of them. 10 of them, including Brunei, Cambodia, Indonesia, Laos, Malaysia, Myanmar, the Philippines, Singapore, Thailand, Vietnam. So they're a region, and they've come together and trying to form common goals and, promote economic ties and trades. And so now, and they've been helping themselves a lot when it comes to energy. We've seen transportation of gas from one of them to the other, and it's been keeping them safe. But the problem now is with the scarcity of gas, in the world, obviously, there are more demands on the little that...
The ones who have.
Exactly. So now they are feeling the pinch. For instance, Malaysia has been called one of the world's largest importers of natural gas. Now they are paying more because it is more expensive. And we can only imagine what that is doing to the economy, to their, they are servicing the money that they spend for all of that.
Right.
So they get primarily from Australia, from Brunei, Indonesia, Singapore. So they get from among themselves and also get from Nigeria. So they've had a plan for over 20 years to connect, for those who have the natural gas, and they do a lot of clean energy, renewable energy, solar, water, and all of that. And they've had a plan to combine it and have, like, since it's a region, so they combine their supply and then they're able to feed themselves. They had it for over 20 years and there has not been any motivation to make
to actually go ahead with it.
Exactly. Now it seems the motivation has come because a country like Singapore now, they say their energy cost, their price has gone the highest in a decade. And guess what? They also have the plan that they have, that where they get their energy from. It needs to be like it's supposed to expand. They're supposed to get new maintenance and new facility in about 5 years. I think from last year, so it's supposed to be like 4 years more. So at this time, it's becoming a problem. So they're supposed to start importing energy.
Just to make up the shortfall.
Exactly, and prepare for, what they're supposed to do, the restructuring and stuff like that. And coming at a time when energy cost is now this high, it's not, I mean, they could have easily turned to Russia and stuff like that. But obviously they can't do that now. So they're looking at developing within themselves and building the infrastructure. But of course it costs money. So they've decided that they're going to create a fund where every member nation would contribute. And they will also open it to members of the private sector to invest in it. It sounds like a good plan, but starting it, they have not started.
Yes, and it's going to take some time to start it. And of course, we must note here that some of the countries in ASEAN, which is the organization you were referring to, are some of the richest countries in the world, but then some of the poorest are also there. And so there's a mix, and some of those who need and some of those who are giving. And as we've seen elsewhere, when it comes to difficulty, the solidarity may not last.
Yeah, because, I mean, we can see from what's happening in Europe. We see countries like Hungary standing out to say, you guys can win yourself off Russian gas, but we don't have the energy and we cannot totally come out to do that. So it kind of brings disagreement, kind of, and so they cannot utterly speak with one voice at the end of the day.
Indeed, that's where that leaves this. But again, all the people we have spoken to, they point out that, look, this war is going to go on for a bit longer than we anticipate. Of course, we didn't anticipate that it was going to be this long anyway. But in the coming days, you and I will have to review this, especially as we're talking about Asia, Europe, America, and then, of course, Africa. Which may be our point. But thank you, Ini. Ini will be, of course, up in just under 5 minutes from the Business Morning Studios. So do join her for more details of these and other business stories making the headlines. But for now, that's where we wrap up Russian invasion this morning. Thanks for being with us. My name is Ladi Akeri Doluale. The show is back on Monday at 9 in the morning. But till then, do have yourselves a wonderful weekend ahead. Good morning.